So I just read this little illustrated book. I say read, there are words in this book, there's not a lot of words, it is mainly illustrations like this. It's a book by Debbie Glory called Night Shift, and Debbie Glory was one of my favourite children's authors as a child. She wrote this series that began with Pure Dead Magic, and it was a fantasy series set in our world, and I adored it. I went to see her at Edinburgh International Book Festival as a child and got her to sign my books. So when I saw that this book had come out, I requested a copy from the publisher, Hotkey Books, because 3 reasons really. Debbie Glory, who I remembered adoring from being a child. 2, dragons. I'm instantly drawn to things with dragons, which this involves. And 3rd, the book itself is a metaphor for Debbie Glory's experience with depression. It obviously depends on the quality of the work and sometimes the mood I'm in, but I do find it useful to read pieces that discuss different metaphors for depression, because depression is one of those diseases where it is incredibly difficult to communicate how it affects you to other people, especially those that don't suffer from depression themselves or haven't experienced it in the past. It's also simultaneously an illness that is shared by many, and it causes very similar things for many people, but is also very unique to you as a person in how it affects you and how you understand it, which also affects the way that you communicate it to other people. And it can be difficult getting that language and those images right to really do it justice in explaining it to people. I'm not explaining myself very well here, am I? I think you can get what I mean. It is very difficult. And if you've ever had the experience of trying to explain depression from your perspective to somebody who's not a medical professional and hasn't experienced depression themselves, you'll know what I mean. So I do think it can be really interesting and potentially useful to read books like this. Now, I have mixed feelings about this book. Firstly, because the metaphor for the depression is a dragon, and I adore dragons, and I find it very difficult to relate the image of a dragon to my experience with depression. So in that sense, Debbie Glory's metaphor doesn't work for me personally, but some of the things she was trying to explain I could understand. And because of that, I thought using this book as an endpoint would be helpful for me to talk about depression in a video, because it's something I find very difficult to talk about and didn't ever necessarily see myself filming a video about because of that. So I am as surprised as some of you might be to see myself sitting here talking about this. But what I thought was really important was one of the messages at the back of this book, which was to do with finding a feather that wasn't black or white but was shades of grey. I feel like that turn of phrase is never going to be seen the same again, is it? But it's a blend of colours, a mixture, and then things shift. It's such an important message to have in a book that explains depression for people who have and do suffer from depression to read, because it does shift. And that's not to say depression is not something you need to tackle, fight, treat, address if you are dealing with it. And although you can't usually see it for yourself, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I say that coming from the perspective of having had quite bad bouts of depression in my life and having returned to a much happier state of being at the end of those. And that's not to say once you've overcome depression that's you rid of it for the rest of your life. Everybody's different, and I can always tell personally when my stress stops being stress and is turning into depression, because something I feel throughout my most stressed moments is still a sense of I need to make this work. I am stressed because I want something and I'm trying to make it happen, or I'm fighting to live the life I want to live and attain the goals I want to achieve, and that's all worth it and I'm striving for something. Whereas when it turns into depression, there's this sense of apathy that develops, and although objectively you know what you want and actually it makes you feel worse to think about losing the things you want, there's also this desire to give up, which doesn't exist to the same degree when I'm just stressed. I find it hard, and I know other people find it hard in those moments, to reach out and feel again inside those reasons why you are, you know, going about your day-to-day life. And because it is a mental health problem and it's internal without necessarily a physical manifestation, it can be really hard to communicate with other people about it who aren't familiar with it, either from a medical or personal experience. And unlike other diseases where you can almost show somebody what it's doing to your body, depression doesn't necessarily have that element to it. And that's not in any way to compare different medical issues, but that's one of the specific problems that I think somebody dealing with depression faces. And I am not somebody who would ever attempt to give kind of advice on this topic through a video to a large audience of individual people, because it wouldn't necessarily apply to anybody else but me. Because it wouldn't necessarily apply to anybody else but me, and that means that it's something I'm not comfortable attempting. But if I'm being wholly honest, right now is one of those times in my life where I am definitely in a phase of relapse. Not the worst it's ever been, but certainly not the best I've ever been either. And reminding myself that I've come out of it before, that other people come out of it, that this isn't a life sentence, is one of the things that I can do personally from within that is the most helpful. So I thought talking about it in a video might have a similar effect. And I also always remind myself that if I need to, I can seek medical help, because although not everybody understands, and that's perfectly understandable that not everybody understands. There are people trained, medical professionals trained to advise you in this situation, and I in the past have had negative experiences at the doctors, but also experiences that did help me treat illness that I have had problems with. And you should never ever be ashamed of seeking out help or taking the advice of doctors. So what can I end this video by saying? Keep plodding along. Keep fighting, as I imagine this book would say. Continuing to exist is pretty darn good. Well done. You know, and not shutting down. Talking about things with whomever you're able to talk about them with. And they may be able to help you, so don't worry about having to be super articulate. What you feel is valid. From depression to a much more minor complaint, I now have really bad pins and needles in my feet and legs, so I'm gonna go and wiggle my legs around a little bit outside in the sunshine, and I will see you all again soon. Bye.